Okay, we're here at Grandma's today. It's July 6th, 2013. And what day is it, Grandma?
Today is my 90th birthday.
90th birthday. Tell us a little bit about yourself, on maybe what year you were born and where. And
Well, I was born July the 6th, 1923 in Watertown, Tennessee, in the front bedroom
in the front bedroom.
of the home that I lived in until I was 8 years old.
Did they have a doctor there, or just?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
I was born, though, at home. Dr. Wells was my doctor.
And how long did you live in Watertown?
And I lived there until I was 10. I lived in this house until I was 8. In the last couple of years, I lived in other locations in Watertown.
And did you go to school in Watertown?
I went the first 4 years in Watertown.
And what was the name of that school?
That was the Watertown Grammar School.
Watertown Grammar School.
And then the summer of 1933, when I was 10 years old, I was 10 years old on July the 6th that summer, and we moved to Lebanon in August following that for all of us to get started in school in Lebanon.
Do you remember what street you moved to in Lebanon?
I moved to North Greenwood Street, and I lived there until 1941, until I was about 17 or 18 years old. So I grew up on North Greenwood.
And where did you go to school when you moved to Lebanon?
I went to McLean School on West Main Street.
And what grade did you start
It was a school
there?
that went through the 6th grade, so I went the 5th and 6th grade there. And then I went across town for the 7th and 8th grade over to Highland Heights. And then I started high school, I think in the fall of 1937, in a brand new high school.
And what high school was that?
It was Lebanon High School.
And it was brand
It
new,
was
huh?
a new building.
All right. And
And I went 4 years to high school there and graduated in 1941.
graduated in 1941. Now, did you meet your husband while you were in high school?
While I was about 15 years old when we first met. He went to Castle Heights Military Academy. His name was Jim Hall. Handsome.
And how long did he go to Castle Heights?
He started in the 5th grade there, all the way from Ottawa, Canada. And he went from the 5th grade through the 12th grade at Castle Heights.
And you met him when you were 15 years old?
We went to a movie together.
And how old was he?
And he was just 3 months older than I was, so he was 15 too.
All right. Do you remember the movie you went to?
I don't remember that movie, but we saw a lot of movies. It was probably 1939, and then it was almost the end of the school year, so he went back to Canada for the summer. Then when he came back in the fall, we started dating, and we dated until he graduated, until we both graduated from high school. So that was 2 or 3 years that we dated.
And what happened after high school?
And then he went away to officers training in Canada, where he became a first lieutenant there in the Canadian Army, because he was a Canadian.
Okay.
And I went away to Sullins College in Bristol, Virginia, for a year. So
What year was that?
I went away in 1941, the fall of 41, and stayed there until June of 1942. And then Jim got his commission in the spring of 1942. Then he came to Lebanon, and we married in July of 1942, July the 7th, and tomorrow will be my wedding anniversary.
Oh,
Do you remember how many years?
I think it'll be about 71 years.
71 years would have been your...
Tomorrow.
I'll be
But
gone.
he was killed before his 22nd birthday.
Now, wait a minute. We're jumping ahead a little bit there. So when y'all got married, how long was it before you had Annie Joy?
A year. We married on July the 7th, 42, and she was born July the 28th, 43.
And then I imagine this is during the Second World War.
He came when she was just a week old, but then he was called back to Canada. And he thought he was going overseas, but he didn't go then. So I went to Canada with her. I left when she was just 3 months old. And I stayed up there until the next spring.
So you and Annie Joy went to Canada through the winter when she was 3 months old.
And it got 50 below zero. I nearly froze to death.
Too cold.
So when I came home, I didn't know for sure, but I was just beginning to suspect that I couldn't be expecting another baby.
Oh.
And this was then, I think, in March or April. March probably, but by April I knew that I was expecting another baby.
And that was
And that was George.
George Hall, my dad.
Uh-huh. And he was born the following December the 10th, 1944. And Jim was overseas by that time.
And so they never saw each other?
And Jim did see never saw a picture of him. He didn't know he was born, and he had written a letter back and that he wanted to name him George Edward.
After his dad.
Uh-huh.
But he never even saw a picture of him,
But
huh?
he never even saw a picture of him.
And,
so George grew up never ever seeing or knowing his
and
father.
how old was Dad when his dad died?
How old
Was my dad George when his dad?
6 weeks old.
6 weeks old.
That's right. And Joey was just 18 months old.
And tell us a little bit about where Jim was killed.
He was killed in the Battle of the Bulge on January the 29th, 1945. Just 2 or 3 months before the war ended in Europe. I think it ended in May, maybe.
And he was buried over there for a
And
time?
he's buried in a cemetery, in a Canadian cemetery in Holland.
In Holland.
Uh-huh.
And he's still there to this day?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
The Canadian Army did not bring the soldiers home.
Now, where did you guys live when, here in Lebanon, when he was overseas?
Oh, we lived with my mother and father. They took wonderful care of us. And they were wonderful grandparents to Joe and George. Just, my children love to even think about them today.
You remember what street that was on?
That was on Pennsylvania Avenue in Lebanon.
Pennsylvania Avenue.
And we lived there until the children were about 12 and 13 years old. And then we moved to a house in West End Heights.
Oh.
But they grew up with my parents and there on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Now, what street did you live? Now, when they were 12 or 13, you moved to West End Heights. What street was that on?
What was that?
What street was that on?
Well, it was just called West End Circle.
Oh, West End Circle.
Uh-huh.
And
And we lived there from 1956 till 1963.
So till they was
And
through high school.
They went through high school. And after George graduated from high school, we moved to Nashville in June of 1963. And we lived in Nashville for 25 years.
And so when you first moved to Nashville from Lebanon, where did you live?
Well, we had rented an apartment on West End Avenue called the Mikado.
Okay.
And
How long did you stay there?
we stayed there from 1963 to 1966. And then we moved over to Bellwood Terrace Apartments. And you were a baby by that time.
So
And
Dad.
Jim, you were born while I was living at Bellwood Terrace. So I must have lived there 2 or 3 years because you all are 2 years apart, aren't you?
That's right, 2 years apart.
You were born in 1966 and Ben was born in 1968.
So while you were living at the Mikado, Joy and George had both married and moved out.
Uh-huh, yes.
So when you moved to Bellwood Terrace, you moved by. That's when you were living by yourself.
That's right. But you all came to visit a lot. And we had a movie of you, Jim, when you were starting to walk, and I think it's got lost, which I'm sorry for, because it was such a
It
cute
was out by the
movie.
fountain out there, I remember.
Uh-huh.
In Bellwood Terrace. I remember seeing the movie. I don't remember being there.
Uh-huh. And I had a picture of Ben with Joey and his dad George made in front of Bellwood Terrace one Easter.
And what street is Bellwood Terrace on?
Bellwood.
Oh, it's on
Bellwood Avenue, I think it's
Bellwood
called.
Avenue.
It's off of West End,
And
over kind of behind West End High School.
And what year did you live in Bellwood Terrace till?
I lived there until 1969, and I moved over to Royal Oaks condominiums across from Bellmead Shopping Center.
And
I remember those.
My memory can go back to there. I do remember that.
Uh-huh. And there was a swimming pool there.
I remember swimming in that swimming pool.
It was the shape of a clover.
Uh-huh, it was.
Oh yeah,
Uh-huh,
I forgot that.
It was.
That's right. Now, and
I lived there till I think 1971, and I moved over to the Versailles apartments on Hillsborough Road, where you all spent a lot of time.
I got vivid memories of being over there.
Uh-huh.
And, me and Ben, a lot of pool time we had over there swimming.
And Suzanne was born the same year I moved over there, in 1971, Suzanne was born.
And I remember a lot of Christmas Eves over there.
Uh-huh.
A
Seemed
lot
like-
of Christmas Eves.
Yeah, it seemed like every Christmas Eve, I mean, that was where we were going to Grandma's.
Uh-huh.
Had a lot of
Good
Thanksgivings.
times, good memories. You all were such cute children.
Now, how long did you live at the Versailles?
I lived there until 1988 when I moved back to Lebanon.
Hey, I want to rewind a little bit
Okay.
because I want to ask you about when was the first movie? What's the first movie you ever remember seeing? And talk a little bit about going to movies in Lebanon.
Oh, let's see. I loved going to the movies. And I started, I guess, when I was 10 years old. I remember some of the movies. The ones I remember the most were some of the most famous movies made in 1939, which was Gone with the Wind.
Right.
And was that in color?
Uh-huh.
When it came?
Yeah,
Okay.
they were in color. And that Judy Garland movie, what was that? What? The famous movie that she made.
Judy Garland?
Uh-huh. The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, The Wizard of
Oh,
Oz.
yeah.
How could we forget that?
And one of my favorite movies was Wuthering Heights. Was
Wuthering
made that
Heights.
same year.
How old were you then?
Well, I'm a third early died. I was 16 years old.
And how much did it cost to go to a movie?
Oh, at the Princess in Lebanon, it was 11 cents up until I was 14 years old. And then it was just 30 cents. Jim and I would go to the movies on Friday night when the Heights boys got out, and I think we just paid 30 cents each. I remember Jim and I saw Gone with the Wind in Nashville when it first came out. We went to Nashville to see it. I think at the Paramount Theater there.
And did you drive down there, or did you
We
take
were both just 16. We had not, of course, not married by that time.
And how did you get to Nashville? Did you
I
drive?
guess we drove, yeah.
Did you
I
take a
think
train?
I started driving when I was 12 years old.
Now, speaking of driving, let's run. I remember a few cars you had. For some reason, I remember them. But as good as you can remember, tell us about the cars you've owned. Like starting with your first one, all the way up through.
Oh, I remember the cars my father had.
All right.
Oh, I remember we had a T-model Ford when we still lived in Watertown on East Main Street, and I was just a little girl, you know, from the time I was born till I was 8 years old. And my sister Ann was 10 years older than I was, but she was, when I was just maybe 4 or 5, she was 14 or 15 and learning to drive. So she'd let me sit on the front seat with her, and she'd just go back and forth in the driveway. We had a real long driveway that went back to the barn. And I can remember riding in that car. I remember it well.
So after the T Model Ford, do you remember any of the other cars?
Well,
that
we moved to Lebanon, and we had a 1933 brand new Ford. It was called a Ford V8. And in 1937, we had a new car, and my father took me with my brother Ellis and my sister Emma Lou and my sister Margaret and my mother. And my father and I all went to New York.
in the
We
car.
went to Washington and Atlantic City and New York, and came back through Kentucky at Abraham Lincoln's birthplace and all the places of interest. And I've gotten good pictures of that. If you haven't seen them, I want you to see them. I
That
know
sounds-
where they
yeah.
are.
That sounds like quite a road trip.
And I was just, I think, 14 years old. I
Now,
had a wonderful mother and father. I can't say enough about them and how good they were.
and
to us.
tell us their names just for the video.
Amos Tinsley Williams was my father, and my mother was Obey Tinsley Williams.
And
She
what
was
year were they born?
My father was born in 1881, and my mother was in March of 1881, and my mother was born in December of 1882.
So in the
And
early
they would be over
1880s.
130 years old now.
And what years did they pass?
My father died in 1957, and my mother died in 1966. My father was 76 years old, and my mother was 83 years old.
Okay.
Did she ever get to meet Jim?
Jim wasn't born, and she knew he was born. I don't know whether she got to see him or not. I remember I had moved to Nashville. I had an apartment there, and I remember me keeping Jim one night when his mother and daddy left, and how cute he was lying in the bed beside my bed, sound asleep. And I mean, he was just born in July, so he wasn't born a month or two old. Mama knew about him, but I don't know whether she ever got to see him or not. Because she died in August of '66, and he was born in July.
So,
he wouldn't have been
yeah,
but a month
Barely a
old.
month old, that's right.
Uh-huh.
Now, what about cars that you owned after?
Okay, but let me get back to more about cars my father had. We
Okay.
had that 37 Ford that we went to New York in.
Oh, okay.
Then we had a 41 Pontiac. It was blue, I remember. Jim and I used to eat. My daddy would let us have that on Friday night.
41
And the
Pontiac.
first night we took it out for a drive, he ran into a ditch, and he was so afraid to go back home. But my father was just wonderful about it. Didn't cause any trouble or make him feel bad about it or anything.
Did he hurt the car at all, or
I
just?
think it was dented a little bit, but not very much.
Was he driving too fast, or?
I don't know. We were turning around.
Oh, okay.
He might have been paying more attention to you than he was the car.
I don't know, but we were turning around in somebody's driveway, and he went into a ditch.
And that was the 41 Pontiac.
And then see, the war started in '41,
Okay.
so there were no new cars. But when we married in '42, he had a black Pontiac.
This is your dad.
And we kept that Pontiac until 1946 because of the war.
Okay.
And in '46, he got a real pretty green Buick. I remember we drove that to Florida. And in 1950, he got a real pretty blue Oldsmobile.
In 1950. How long did you have that?
And then, in 1956 was the year I moved to West End Heights. And my father-in-law, George Hall, gave me a brand new car, a brand new '54 Ford.
Oh,
It was two-toned, cream and blue, real pretty sport car,
1954.
1954. And
Is this when you lived in West End Heights?
West End Heights, yeah, West End Heights. I think both. I think that was, I had that the time we moved. We were on Pennsylvania during part of that time. Then we moved to West End Heights in 1956. In 1957, I traded it, and I got a bright red Pontiac when Joy was a senior in high school.
Was that a convertible?
No, it was not a convertible, but
Okay.
it had a white top and it was red, two-tone, red and white.
This was
Beautiful
57?
car, and that's the one that George had the wreck in. Joy went to UT the next year, and George and my niece Jeannie Osborne, who was a good friend and cousin of George's, were going up to drive to Knoxville to see Joy. And they had a terrible wreck. They went off of the road and down the embankment. And George crawled all the way back up and left Jeannie in the car till he stopped the car up on the road to come down and help her. And neither one hurt seriously.
Well,
The
good.
car was totaled.
Wow. So what'd you have after that then?
Let's see, what year are we in now?
1957?
1961 or 2.
Well, that one was...
Joy graduated in '61, so it must have been about 1961.
Okay.
She had gone to, or '62, she was at UT.
Didn't Dad cut the pipes off of one of them? One of the cars you had, a muffler?
Oh, that was a blue Chevrolet.
What year was that?
He didn't tell me, but what did you call that when they take it out and race it?
Put header pipes on it.
Drag racing it.
Yeah, drag racing it.
I don't know what he did to it, but anyway,
just got real
that
loud,
was the
didn't it?
next car I got. After that, I had a blue Chevrolet.
You don't remember what year that was?
62 Chevrolet.
All right.
Real pretty silver blue. And I was working down at the Presbyterian Church at that time.
In Nashville or Lebanon?
In Lebanon.
Oh, okay.
For Mr. William G. Walker. And he was one of the favorite people of my life that he did so much to me in so many ways. And we joined the Presbyterian Church when Joe and George were like 12 and 13 years old.
Okay.
I backed it up a little bit. And then later I went to work there and worked there a couple of years while Claudine Prowl went back to school to get her degree in music. And I was kind of replacing her until she could come back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I enjoyed my time there. And then in '63, I moved to Nashville.
Then you moved to the Mikado.
It's Mikado. and then those other places that I told you about.
You remember what kind of car you had down when you moved to Nashville?
Had that blue Chevrolet, and it was, I was dealing with all the problems it had from George taking to drag racing. And I'll never forget when I decided I was going to have to trade it in. I took it to see how much I was going to get for it, and it was a real pretty car, but the guy that I was buying the car for off the other car said, let me take it for a drive so I could tell you how much I could give you for it. And when he came back, you should have seen his expression. He said, what has this car been through? So I didn't get too much for it. Oh, and after that was when I got my blue Dodge Dart convertible.
I remember that. That's the first car I remember you having.
It was a 68. And that's what the summer that I worked for the movie company where they were making the Mickey Spillane movie. All the directors and actors came out of California, and they hired me to be the production secretary. And I had a wonderful summer. All that summer.
And they were making a Mickey Spillane movie?
And my convertible's in the movie.
Oh, all right.
I've got a picture of it. Chris George was one of the stars, and there was a famous event video with the girl in it. And I just had a lot of fun that summer.
And that was a 68 blue Dodge Dart convertible.
Uh-huh.
And what did you have after that?
Well, I got a green Ford that I had a lot of trouble with.
I remember, wasn't that a Gran Torino?
A Gran Torino.
Yeah, but and I never really enjoyed that car. Then I went to work at River Rest selling condos.
How long did you work out at River Rest?
Well, let's see. I think I've jumped way ahead just because I didn't work out there until the late 70s. See, I got my real estate license and sold real estate with Randolph Realty in 1971.
Okay.
And I think I drove that Dodge Dart a lot of times, and it was not a good car, to take people from out of town to look at houses. But I had a good time with it. And after that was when I got that green Ford.
That's the first car. Well, no, I remember the blue Dodge Dart, but I do remember the green Ford Gran Torino.
I think I had that. I did when I went to work at River Rest, and that was the late 70s.
Okay.
And after that, I got that red
Malibu.
The Malibu. I remember that.
Red Malibu Pontiac.
I got to drive that one.
No, it was a
Chevrolet.
Chevy Malibu.
But it had a V8 in it.
Yeah,
It was a small little car with a V8.
Yeah, I like that car.
That was a good car.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Now, this is when you lived over in River Rest. I'm sorry, Versailles.
Oh, Versailles.
At the Versailles.
I think I still had that car when we moved up to Lebanon.
You did. Now, how long did you live in the Versailles?
Well, I lived there from 1971 to 1988.
And then in '88, you decided to.
But I didn't keep the car. Did I keep that car that long?
You had it for a long time.
I did. Seems to me I had it, but I still came back to Lebanon.
And you moved up here on Spring Creek Road, where we are today, in 1988.
But I had a little Mazda when I came up here.
626.
Mazda.
Yeah. I remember that car.
I don't remember that one.
I'm not sure just when I got that.
And I was in the Navy when you moved up here.
Yeah.
And you've been here from '88.
Since 1988.
25 years.
Can't believe that, but that's true.
And what year was this house built?
1917.
1917, and it's 2013.
Uh-huh.
We're talking 96 years old.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't show it either.
This house is 6 years
It's gonna
older
be
than.
painted this year too. I can't wait.
And I hear you've got the roof cleaned also.
Oh, I have a grandson, great big handsome grandson named Jim that did clean my roof and did such a good job. It looks brand new. So that's the biggest thing we got going for us now. Next is to get this house painted.
All right.
And a few things have happened in between.
Well,
Like I had a stroke a little over a year ago.
tell us a little bit about
Sent me
that.
back until I was 85 years old. I was in wonderful health, feeling great. And I guess it was 2009,
About 4 years ago.
I discovered I had this kidney problem. But, so they stabilized that, but the next year, about a year ago, I had a stroke and had to be in the hospital about a month. And it took my balance. It affected my eyesight. It kind of...
Now, have you got that back 100%? Your balance and your eyesight?
They're not back, no.
Not back?
I'm better, but it's not anything like I used to be, so I'm not doing as well as I was.
Well, I think for 90 years old, Grandma, you're a picture of health, as far as I'm concerned. I hope I'm in as good a health when I'm 90.
I made it. I'm doing better, and I hope I hang on for a while longer.
Well, this is what I want to make sure the next 10 years you try to remember everything as detailed as you can, because we're going to do this again in 10 years. And when you can talk.
But there's just so much about our family that I want to tell that goes even further back, you know, to my grandparents, and there's just a wonderful family that I'm so proud of.
Well, is there anything you'd like to talk about right now? While we got the.
Well, my father's parents lived out on a farm out from Watertown, between Watertown and Lebanon. And I think that's where my father was born.
Is that more like Cherry Valley or?
The Cherry Valley,
Okay.
just about 2 or 3 miles this side of Watertown. But he moved, my mother and father married in 1907. And
How old were they when they married?
my mother was 24, and I guess my father was 25 or 26.
Oh, okay.
That's kind of late to be married back in, huh?
And
Was it their first time?
my mother was a beautiful pianist. She played classical music like you've never heard before, just beautiful. And she entertained us all the years I was growing up, and all my friends that would come in, and my brothers and sisters' friends, and she would play for us. And not too long ago, a lady from Watertown told me, she said, I still remember your mother and the way she played the piano for us. So they've never forgotten.
Now, who were their parents? Your mother and father's parents?
My mother's parents were Ellis Tinsley and Ann Cummins Tinsley.
And your
My grandmother Cummins was from Cookville, Tennessee, and it's a beautiful place up there. Just recently, that farm stayed in the family just until recent years. It's been sold and is now a state park called Cummins Falls State Park.
Oh, yeah.
That was my grandparents, my great-grandparents. They had a grist mill there that was destroyed by a flood in 1928.
Now, what about your dad's parents?
They were from Tennessee, lived on a farm out in Cherry Valley, out from Watertown. And his father's name was Sheila Williams. And my father had a brother, Benton Williams, and a sister, Mabel. There were just 3 children, my father's immediate family.
And what was your...
And my mother had 2 sisters and a brother. My mother's name was Ove, O-V-A, and she had a sister named Avo, A-V-O. They were named for twins, but they were not twins. And Avo was 3 years older than my mother. And then they had a brother, Will Tinsley, who was later a president of Cade Sloan in Nashville.
How did the Great Depression affect your family?
Oh, well, we went right through that. It was 1929. I was 6 years old, and my father had a mill in Watertown called Williams Pen Mill, or A.T. Williams Manufacturing Company. And the banks closed. He lost it all. And there he was with a wife and 6 children and a business that no longer a business. So, but we always had a big garden, and we always had lots to eat. We had a big kid house with chickens, and we had a cow with milk, and I never felt poor, never felt hungry.
You never felt the effects of the Depression?
And I always had just loved and cared for them. And in 1933, my father answered an ad in the paper. He saw where somebody wanted to make barrel staves. He knew he had the knowledge to know how to do that, so when we moved to Lebanon, he started a stave mill here called A.T. Williams Company, and he made barrel staves, the sides of the barrel and the top, which is called the heading. He made the rough staves and heading that he had shipped to Kentucky, Louisville, I think, where they made it into a finished barrel. But he had one of the best businesses here in Lebanon.
And what year did he start the barrel stave business?
1933, and it's the year Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected president.
And how long
And the
did
banks opened up. Roosevelt got the banks going again. And my father rebuilt his business and had one of the best businesses in Lebanon going through the 30s and 40s.
and how long did he have that? How long was it open for?
He had the mill, went through the 30s and 40s and into the 50s. He died in 1957.
And so was his business still going in
He
1950?
still had, I think it had changed somewhat, but the mill was still there when he died, I remember.
It was still an active mill.
Uh-huh. And he had the mill hands that worked for him and how loyal they were and how good he was to all of them. I've had people tell me through the years that say, I'll never forget Mr. Williams and how good he was to us.
Now tell us a little bit about your brothers and sisters.
Well, I had two brothers. I had one baby brother that died. He was Mama's second baby. And he only lived for 6 months because she got double pneumonia and had to quit nursing him, and he died. It was her second child, so of course I never knew him. But then I had my brother Ellis and a brother David were the two oldest children. And then I had 3 sisters, Ann, Emmalou, and Margaret. And I was the youngest child.
So there was 6
Six of us that grew up. All wonderful brothers and sisters.
Now, how old did they live to?
And all my sisters all lived above 85. I'm the only one in the family that has lived to be 90.
Hmm.
My mother lived to 83, and my sisters were 85 and above before they died. But I've made it all the way to 90.
Made it to 90.
I'm the only one, and I'm the only one left.
Going strong.
What was that?
And you're going strong at 90.
Oh, well, I'm going not as strong as I'd like to, but I'm still here.
Ben, you got anything else to ask?
And then, of course, the most wonderful part of my life have been my grandchildren.
Tell us about them.
Okay, I've got.
Try to go into detail, too.
Tell you what.
I said go into,
And my wonderful
detail.
son, George, that I miss so much, that lived until he was 59 years old. And he did not recover from aneurysm surgery. It's just such a loss that I can't even get to tell you how much I miss him. But he had 2 children, Jim that I'm talking to right there, and a daughter, Suzanne. And then my daughter Joy had one child named Ben, and he's right over here. And they're 2 handsome guys, and they're here with me today. And Ben and Jim has one daughter, Elizabeth, and Ben has one son, William.
That's right.
George had 3 children. He had Jim. No, he only had 2, Jim and Suzanne. And Suzanne had 3 children, and Jim had 1.
That's right.
That's 4, and then Ben had 1, so I have 5 great-grandchildren.
That's right.
Is that right?
Can you name them all?
I have Elizabeth, and I have Caleb, and Tally, and Lexi, and William.
And not only did you name them all, you named them all in order that they were born.
And William I talked to on the phone today. I'm going to see him tomorrow. He's going to be baptized tomorrow.
That's right.
He's 3. He was 3 May the 14th. And he's beautiful. And so they're my whole world now.
All right.
And I know there's lots more to tell, and maybe I'll think of more later. We get on.
All right. Well, that's quite a bit.
Talk some more.
I'm glad we was
that's a
able to
lot.
come up and spend.
If you can think of anything you want to ask me, I think I'll have some answers.
I'm glad we were able to get up here on your 90th birthday.
Uh-huh. I remember my 6th birthday party.
Tell us about that.
We lived in Watertown, and it was in the front yard. It had a beautiful front yard. This house we lived in was a Victorian-style house. It's still there. Still looks good. I still love to drive by it.
You remember what street that's on?
On East Main Street in Watertown, a big front yard and a big. When I was growing up, there was a big barn in the back and a big hen house and a big garden, and just a beautiful place to live. And but this birthday party, I was 6 years old. It was on the. I had a long sidewalk that I learned to skate on. But I remember all the little children there that were bringing presents, and I looked down and I saw next door there was a little boy coming with a present, but he looked too shy to come in by himself. So I went running out there to get him, to bring him to the party. And his name was Joe Harold Patterson.
Joe Harold Patterson.
Cute little boy, blonde-headed boy with a lot of curly hair. And he came and brought my present, and I don't know if he would have ever had the courage to come on in by himself.
That's a good thing you saw him.
But I forgot. And then I had a party when I was 10 years old. It's still in Watertown. That was the summer we moved to Lebanon. But July the 6th that year, I had a party there. I was 10. And a little boy named James Oakley brought me a pretty pink bud vase, and I still have it.
From your 10th birthday, 80 years ago.
Uh-huh. I still have it, and I think he died just this past year.
And what was his name again?
James Oakley. He was later mayor of Watertown, and he was a little younger than I was. But I saw the picture in the paper, and I remembered him, and I remembered the vase he brought me.
Can you tell us a little bit about the high chair beside you?
Oh, the high chair. This high chair was bought for my sister Ann, who's 10 years older than I am. So she was born in 1913. And my grandfather, Williams, bought this chair for her at a yard sale and gave, I think, 15 cents for it.
Pull it a little closer to you.
And it's a shaker chair. The last time I had it appraised, they said it was worth $2,000, and that was several years ago. So I don't know what it would be worth today.
So we know at a minimum it's 100 years old.
That's right. This year.
That's right.
And I don't know how old it was when he bought it, though.
And can you think of every body that has used that to sit in, starting with your sister Ann?
Everybody that what?
That has used it?
Yes. Well, I know Ann said it when she was a baby, and I don't remember everyone borrowing it so much. I just remember me sitting in it up next to my father until I was at least 10 years old, until I couldn't sit in it anymore.
Right.
But I remember growing up with it and sitting right next to my father.
Now, how about Annie, Joy, and Dad? Did they sit in it?
Uh-huh. And all the grandchildren.
I can remember sitting
And
in
I
it.
have a picture of you in it when you're about a year old.
That's right.
Did I get to sit in it, or you always kick me out?
Oh, I think Ben was in there.
I'm sure you did. I'm
Yeah.
sure you all sat in it. I just love it. So,
And Williams got to sit in it.
and
Yeah.
William sits in it now.
Yeah. Does Elizabeth sit in it?
Yeah, Elizabeth's used it. I think everybody's used it.
Uh-huh.
Tally, Lexi, Caleb.
All of them. It's a wonderful little chair.
It's a nice fan. Now, you said your dad bought it in
My
1913.
grandfather, my dad's dad.
Your dad's dad, what was his
Granddaddy
name?
Williams.
Granddaddy Williams.
Uh-huh.
Bought it at a yard sale,
Or whatever they were called then. I guess it was just a yard
a
sale.
rummage sale or something,
Uh-huh.
in 1913.
Ann was a baby. I'm not sure just how old she was.
And what
when he
town
bought
was
it.
that? Was that Watertown?
We were living in what? No, they were living out on the farm.
And Cherry
See,
Valley.
they didn't move into town until the year till 1922, and then I was born in 1923.
And this is the farm in Cherry Valley?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And it stayed in the Williams family just until 10 or 15 years ago.
And there's still a cemetery out there, isn't it?
And we're going to get it all cleaned up, and we've got that scheduled to be
Okay.
done. Because that's where my grandparents and my Aunt Mabel, who was my father's sister, beautiful red-headed woman who died when she was just 28 years old.
All right, Grandma. It's been a good 90th birthday. I hope you enjoyed it.
Well, it has, and I've enjoyed it too, and I can't wait to see what.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, happy
Yeah.
birthday.
Thank you very much. Thank you.